All right, welcome everyone to the second joint meeting amongst the taxing bodies in the village. I've heard that we need to come up with a cooler name, so if anyone figures that out tonight.
Trifecta.
We have too many trifectas, but anyway, I know Kevin's been pushing for that, but anyway.
In the absence of other options.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. So I want to call the meeting to order, and I think first of all, Judy is going to call in Village Council.
Indeed. Housh.
I'm here.
Stokes.
Here.
Sorry, McQueen. Here. DeBoer Leonard.
Here.
Brown. Here. Thank you.
Okay. And then is the school board doing a?
We don't have a.
Okay. Okay. And I think I remembered from the last time Township did not need to do that either?
No.
Okay, great. So one brief announcement I wanted to make. If everyone doesn't know, it is our beloved Mayor Pam's birthday today.
Wow.
So I did want to say happy birthday to Mayor Pam, who brings a lot of joy to our community and, doesn't have to, deal with some of the things that we all deal with. And so, but I love that she's, yes, but I love that she's engaged in supporting all the great work that we do. Next, I wanted to, in terms of reviewing the agenda, first of all, again, thank all three bodies for being willing to have a second meeting. And I mean, we'll talk about it in next steps, but I think that, this is something that we should think about continuing. And again, this came out of, I think, two aspects. One was a lot of citizens indicating that they wanted us to be coordinating our activities. And I know it's not something that we've done in the past, but I thought our first meeting was great. I appreciate the participation continuing. And I think the second thing is it's really important for us to have good communication channels. And so so we'll see where people are at the end of the meeting, but I do want to, again, just recognize that I love that we have the second meeting, that people are here, and also I recognize that probably everybody would want to be here. Certainly Don, and our thoughts with him, and I know other school board members had different commitments or whatever. So anyway, I guess I want the community to understand that, at least at this point, the sense I get is that there's commitment to having these collaborative conversations. The other thing I wanted to say related to the agenda is, to me, the priorities are the report outs from each of our bodies. And so I don't want anyone to freak out if those go beyond 10 minutes or if there are more questions. And then a second priority, and we don't have really many citizens here today, but that citizen input and feedback is something that I think is always important. So if we get folks showing up, I want to prioritize those things, and then just mention that the other agenda items, if we continue to meet, in my mind are sort of standing agenda items that we can always come back to. But I think there's a lot to talk about on the front end of the agenda. So I don't know if anyone has any other comments about things we need to add, remove, or modify on the agenda. But if not, we'll hop into the updates. Okay? So, all right, so I think first up, and we're going to change this every time if we continue to meet, but we thought that the township could lead things off. And Marilyn, I think you've got that privilege.
Okay, and people at home are seeing what we see.
And the mic.
The people at home are seeing our handout. This is this one, if you guys have it.
Yep.
I didn't print the first page. The first page said in bold letters, thank you very much for approving our levy. We're very humbled by it and encouraged. The final vote was 59.8 to 40.1, I believe.
Marilyn.
Mike, move the whole thing over, move the whole thing closer.
Okay. So thank you. And I thought I did a little breakdown since I'd done it for myself anyway, and I thought it'd be fun here. Because when I went to bed that night, I really didn't know if it was going to pass or not. I'd been trying to take the temperature of people in town, and it didn't feel necessarily like it was, although my colleagues at Miami Township were more encouraged than I was. So I thought, like, when I heard in the morning that it passed by 60%, I thought, who passed this levy? Who are the people in town who supported it, and who put us over the top? So I broke it down by precinct. We have, just for fun, the top four here are the in-town precincts, and the bottom two are the rural township precincts. And I was surprised because in my head I said, oh, those rural township residents really came through for us, was my thought. And when I looked at it, precinct 440 was big supporters. 441 and 442, it's up 62, 61%. That's east side of town and west side of town, and then south of Herman, almost 60%. And then we barely passed in the rural areas of the east part of the township, which really surprised me. And we're just over 50% in the west side. So I hope you find those numbers as interesting as I do. Look at the voter turnout, how strong the voter turnout is on the south side of town, and how much lower it is in 441, 442. That's interesting. If I was going to run a levy again, I'd be trying to get voter turnout in the what I call the heart of town, east and west. So enough fun. The next page is numbers. So basically what you're looking at here is two funds. This levy was all about payroll. We have many things we do in the township and different funds for those things, but this isn't about the cemetery or the roads or our offices, and this is about the fire payroll and operations. The levy, of course, was strictly for payroll. So mainly we get we operate the firehouse from our continuing levy fund. At the beginning of this year, we had $1,068,000 in that. Our current balance is $23,000. So hence the reason we sounded an alarm and asked for your help. We all by now know those reasons, falling off of volunteers, shortage of workers, and wage increases and inflation. Notice the revenue in that fund. It's been for a few years around $746,000. That's going down due to the fact that we had a contract to serve Eastern Bath Township that it ends on January 1st. So I broke it down from, this is all firehouse, payroll and non-payroll. This is just firehouse, not any township trustees or road crews or financial officers. So we spent $825,000, as you can see, from that fund for firehouse payroll and $237,000 for non-payroll. Very interesting for a fund that had a revenue of $746,000 and will have a revenue of $584,000 next year. So that's a total of $1,062,000 out of a fund that had $1,068,000. A second smaller fund, fire and rescue, which is funded by EMS billing when people are transported to facilities or whatever. We bill their insurance, and that's the revenue for this fund. About $147,000 a year. We had some carryover in that. We did pay some payroll out of that 46,000 and some non-payroll for a total of 130. So I took those two yellow lines and put our total payroll. There's some differing numbers amongst us, but it's all pretty close of what we think our payroll is. And together with the non-payroll operations fund, we're darn near $1.2 million. Up here you can see the new levy, our new 3.5 mil levy will raise 670,000. Along with our continuing levy, which has been continuous for 20 years or so, and our EMS billing. So you'll see what we'll be taking in and what we're spending on payroll. Not payroll, for total firehouse operations. So 1.2 versus 1.4 million. Hold that thought and turn the page, because I asked Colin, one of the reasons we've been able to keep up is that we've been putting off some capital expenditures. We've been putting off, wouldn't you say, Colin, on some needed things, some gear that we need, some vehicles. These are, Colin projected what we would need in the coming 2, 4, 6, 8 years. A medic, which I have learned is a fancy word for an ambulance. It's more than an ambulance. It's like an emergency room on wheels. We'll need a new fire engine. SCBA is respiratory gear. A lot of our gear we're pushing it past the limits of when it's supposed to be used. And you could read the rest, some smaller things, cardiac monitor. So we have to start planning to replace these things. We've already set aside some funds for the medic, the first item. So when you look at this discrepancy between what we're bringing in and what we're paying out, you can see that we have some planning to do over the next 10 years. So, but I want to go back to this page again, because that number, the total payroll, 876,059, that's not a number that any of us are happy with right now. We think that can be a lot better. And we've already taken some steps this past month, and we've done a lot of work with the overtime and restructuring categories that people are in, and those changes will go into effect in January. So I'm crossing my fingers to see what effect those changes are going to be made on that. And then we have another announcement that you guys in the room probably already know, that Colin, our beloved fire chief, is leaving us in July. He's retiring. And so we have a big shift coming there, and we think it's a good opportunity to look about how we're staffed and how efficiently we've done it, and think we could look at the whole system with the opportunity of a big piece of our staff being rearranged. So, and then also the non-payroll, the 321,000, I suppose that deserves a good look too. And that's all I have to report.
All right.
Any
Thanks,
questions?
Marilyn. Yeah.
I could answer questions if I can.
Yeah, I have a general question. Like some of the equipment you alluded to, Marilyn, that you say we've pushed past when it should be used. I know, like the state has an office that inspects elevators and makes sure they're safe and all that. Is there any type of oversight for this type of question that would encourage you to replace it sooner than you might want to?
I'll let Colin take that question because I have no idea.
All righty. For the, with the exception of the ambulance, everything else that we use has a lifespan that's determined by national standards. So for instance, firefighter gear is only good for 10 years. Now it doesn't explode after 10 years, but if someone's hurt wearing it after 10 years, then we open ourselves up to significant liability. So that's why things have been pushed kind of right to the edge.
Right.
The SCBA, we're at about 15 years, and that's the edge of that standard. So we're kind of close. And then the cardiac monitor, medical equipment, just deadlines. So once the manufacturer decides they're not going to support it anymore, you have to buy new stuff. So, and we're coming up on that limit right now. So,
So Colin, you'll retire, and that will make a change in the staffing, but then you'll probably come right around and volunteer right after that, right?
maybe we'll see. We'll see.
I wish you the best. either way.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So also, I just want to, so Marilyn and I talked about these numbers this morning, and, it really felt to me that you guys kind of got the levy numbers right. And so I guess, Colin, I wanted to ask, from your perspective, does this kind of look like what the 10-year cycle is going to be, like 1.5 to 2 million, what has to sort of be, I guess, allocated for capital improvements?
Yeah, certainly there are opportunities also for grants. Unfortunately, federal grants for fire service that are non-wildland are not very plentiful as opposed to law enforcement grants and wildland fire grants, but we're eyeing a federal grant for our SCBA replacement, so that would eliminate that and take care of that cost. Other things, unfortunately, we can't, the federal grant program that we would utilize, the AFG, won't replace our fire engine. It's too new, even though it's 20-something years old. And our gear is also too new, even though it's expiring. It's a very bizarre program. But a lot of that stuff we could look at grants and that type of thing as well. So hopefully it'll bring that cost down, the out-of-pocket cost down.
Great. Any other questions for Colin? All right, Chris?
Thank you, Brian.
I think
I do have a quick question. I just want to confirm payroll includes salary and benefits, correct?
Oh, yeah, it includes
Thank you.
salary, wages, benefits, Social Security, pension funds, Medicare,
All right.
et cetera.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does this represent a shortfall in your funding? With future capital needs? Or is it something you're covering from the revenues you're bringing in now?
you need to grab the mic.
We will. Once the new levy starts, yes, it will be a 10-year program where we can put money aside.
Okay.
Instead of spending it on personnel costs, we can then put it aside and spend it on, quit spending it on personnel, as I say, and spend it on capital.
We've not been spending for these things because
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
my
yeah,
question is,
maybe I don't understand.
beyond the levy that just passed, which you said was for payroll, right?
Yeah.
Where is this funds coming from? Is there going to be another ask of the public coming up?
No.
Or, okay.
I don't anticipate one.
We have a levy. It's not continuing per se. It's a 5-year levy, and it's coming up in a year and a half, everybody. But it is for operational expenses, and it's the same 3.5 mils that this one was, but we've had this one in place for 20-some years.
Yeah.
And so, and it's on the sheet, and it generates $558,000 or something a year. And from that, we will set aside, hopefully, somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000 a year. And yes, in 10 years, that's only $750,000. That's probably not enough, but, with grants and who knows what, we may be able to stretch that a little bit more.
And hopefully decreasing payroll costs.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, if everything weren't sort of cascading and coming old or expiring all at the same time, that you could, at some point, stagger the expenses, so you don't have to do this every 10 years. Maybe it's 2 years or 3 years for this thing and switch up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, the next 10 years would be lighter than this next
Right.
coming 10 years.
Good. Got you. Okay.
I have a question.
Mike.
So, I'm not sure if it's to you or you, but given all of the runs that,
Mike.
given all the runs that you do, what proportion of the expenses that you incur for those runs do you actually get reimbursed for? Do you have a sense of that? And you said you get reimbursed for insurance runs to hospitals, I guess. Do you get reimbursed for runs to accidents, runs to people's houses to pick them up when they've fallen?
Nope, nothing other than transporting someone to a hospital. That's the only time we get a reimbursement, as it were.
So the reimbursement that you get is a modest amount compared to your
Yes,
total
ma'am.
payroll expenses. I mean, I guess it's listed somewhere, or I don't know.
147,000 approximately a year, 150,000 a year maybe.
So roughly 10% of our budget.
I have a question. Marilyn, you said that there's a possibility of decreasing payroll? And I ask because my understanding was that payroll is more likely to go up over time, especially, I think replacing Colin is going to be a challenge because of the expertise
Yeah.
that Colin has.
I like to open up to others. I see right now decreasing so that we can maximize it over the long haul. I know it's going to go up over the long haul. I'm thinking about right now, changes we made in overtime, changes we may make in our staffing structure. Colin, do you have anything to say about that?
No, I mean, I think the big change would be a decrease in overtime costs. That has helped to inflate this cost higher than just being salaries, utilizing an FLSA exemption that we can put everybody on instead of just 5 that we have, or 3 that we have on right now, would help increase their work period and decrease the overtime.
Okay, I see.
And to continue to recruit qualified people who can work, a normal schedule instead of having to pay a substantial amount of overtime for already existing personnel. So, we can cut back that way also. But I guess the bottom line is it's kind of like the federal government. We're not exactly decreasing costs. We're just not increasing them at the rate that we expected we might have to increase them. So it's a decrease. Believe me.
Trust me.
Yeah, trust me.
Okay. Chris, did you want to?
I had just a couple of real quick things that I wanted to say. One is I wanted to mirror Marilyn in personally thanking everyone who voted for the levy. I'm so pleased that everybody in Miami Township can feel safe that if their family member at some time has a medical emergency and needs some assistance, that we are ready, willing, and qualified and able to do that job. And that just says everything to me about what township people are here for, to provide for the community. And it looks like we'll be able to provide that for quite a ways into the future, which leads me into my next thing. But people don't mind, I'm going to grandstand here for a minute. I'll take my mic with me, though. And as was mentioned a moment ago, we are going to lose the only fire chief we've had in 27 years or so, pretty soon. Of course, he said that for 2 years, and then he went back on it and stayed for 2 years longer than he was going to. So I don't know whether this is actually a retirement come July or not, but we'll all find out. But it's just incredible the amount of impact this man has had on Miami Township Fire and Rescue. I mean, from what he started with in 97, 96, and to where we are today is just amazing. I mean, not to mention the equipment that we have, and not to mention the facilities that we have, but it's the personnel that we have, the amount of fully qualified and highly qualified personnel who can respond at a moment's notice is just, it's just great. And it's 99.9% due to this man here. I mean, he has virtually recruited every single person who's come through Township Fire and Rescue, every paramedic, every EMT, every firefighter. He's recruited them, he's trained them, he's worked alongside of them, he's given them silly awards at holiday dinners, like one coming up, and he's bid goodbye to virtually all of them also as they went on their way to bigger and hopefully better things for themselves. But This is a man, not only is he the fire chief, and not only does he work tons of hours during the week, and a lot of hours over what it would be a normal 4-hour week, 40-hour week. I mean, we're talking 50s and 60 hours, and yes, he gets comp time for it, but we have to negotiate that down because of regulations. But he's also been continually the highest producing volunteer responder on the force ever since he got here. He's always been number one of the person who comes out at 2 a.m. and puts his stuff on and comes down here and jumps in an ambulance or a fire engine or something and goes out and does something. It's just remarkable the amount of effort he's put into this position. And there's just not enough words that can say thank you for everything that he's done. And I'm certainly not doing very well at it, but I certainly might start in saying thank you to all the work that he did. And we will miss you. And you can come back and volunteer anytime you like. Kevin will arrange your hours.
That's right.
Thank you very much. That's
Well,
lovely.
thank you
I
very
appreciate it. That's a lovely tribute.
And could we give him a round of applause?
Yeah. Later. Later. If you really retire.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see.
Well, I appreciate highlighting that, and honestly, I think there's room in these meetings to, kind of celebrate like the great services that we have, and I think it's a good transition to the school board, and in particular, I feel like every time I think about this meeting, I think about comments that Terry has made around the need for the community to understand what it takes to support a healthy, thriving community. And, again, I understand that, we pay more to live in Yellow Springs, but it's because of things like what Chris just said, around we feel safe and we know we're going to be responded to. In the case of the schools, we're going to have schools of excellence. And in the case of the village, we're going to keep the lights on. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Awesome. Do you want to go?
Are we going to talk about the facilities committee?
We are. I just want to kick off here. There's a few things with first off, all of our board members not here. I asked for that, and we didn't view this as a deliberative meeting. We're not here to debate anything on the school board or school board items. I see it as an information sharing, and I hope that what we get out of this is that we can talk about what we've got coming up and understand what you've got coming up. So again, there's no surprises back and forth between the public entities. But I did want to point out, and we're going to have some training on this, hopefully come January, maybe. There is a new law in Ohio, HB 140, which I know impacts school boards, and it's very restrictive on what we can say around levies. For instance, we're not even allowed, if we were to pass a levy, to thank the public. That would be a violation of law, and they are starting to prosecute school board members and superintendents. So we're going to have our lawyers come in, hopefully in the January meeting, to discuss this and try to go over the nuances of it and where our lanes are. So again, I hope to be very factual in what we've got coming up, but then to be very careful on what we're saying, behind those. So I want to express what our needs are, but at the same time keep us on the straight and narrow.
HB 140 is not exactly new, but according to our legal counsel, I'm going to say Attorney General, could be auditor, is looking very carefully at all political entities. HB 140 applies to all political entities, but in particular, school districts and school boards. They suspect it's just another kind of symptom of the political climate that we're in, but so, for example, once we have something on the ballot, we really can't. There's even a debate about how much we have a responsibility to provide factual information, but there's even a debate about how fine is the line between factual information and, being a proponent of what you're doing. None of us in here, none of the three political entities would put anything on the ballot if we didn't need it on the ballot. But we're not allowed to talk about why we think you should vote for it. It's this crazy logic, but you know, you're more than welcome to attend our board meeting when when Bricker and Eckler presents to us on that, because it does apply to political entities. We're a little different, I think, but that's what TJ was referring to.
And so we don't have a specific update. I think Judith is going to update on the facilities process since she's been leading that on our facilities committee. But our financial outlook, I think, is about the same as last time. Jay's going to give a little update because I think we're kind of trying to clarify some timelines so we can give some of that of when potentially a levy issue might go. But it's also very dependent on the work that Judith's been engaged with facilities. So on that, I'll just hand it over.
Thank you. Well, I just want to go over what the committee's charge is. To just be clear about that. I was asked to chair the committee that Dorothy Bouquet and I put the charge together. And basically the idea is, we called it a permanent improvement plan. The community had asked for an alternative to a new build in terms of a renovation plan. The permanent improvement plan includes maintenance, renovation, and new construction. And so we're doing that, and I feel very good about it. We're responding to what the community has asked of the school district, and we are developing that plan as a comparison to a new build. We got numbers on Friday from our architect. He put together, numbers of recommendations he's making, as well as recommendations from our maintenance plan advisor. The numbers are pretty rough, and there's several members of the committee. We really need to, I guess you call it, scrubbing the numbers. I'm looking over those very carefully, and there's some information that we still need to get, and really in order to have, I think, legitimate numbers. The way the report was written is there are basically kind of two tranches. One is called a foundational renovation, and then one is, including all of the requests by the administrative staff in terms of their ideas about educational adequacy. The foundational recommendations is a number at 25 million. We're hoping we can get that number down. I don't know how significantly, but we're just starting to work those numbers. What's in that are things that you would think of as a foundational renovation. And we had visited Oakwood, their junior high school, which is a 1920s building, and they did an $18 million renovation, and it's kind of the role model for the way it was being thought about by our architect. So what they did was it replaced all their mechanical systems, including all HVACs and air exchanges. They added air conditioning to both of their gyms, which we do not have air conditioning in our gym, and also air conditioning in their auditorium. They gutted and updated all their restrooms, replaced all ceilings and lighting, updated PA and tech systems, and updated their electrical system. And then they replaced half of the roof, which was, they did that. They did not, in the project, include flooring, furniture, and windows. Now, we know our needs are a little bit different than theirs. We need secure vestibules. That has to be part of a foundational plan. So that is included. There's going to be new offices, in which he's bringing together the administrative offices as well as some of the services, that are in the schools, the social worker and some of the those kind of folks. Let me just think here. In the grade school, the old trailer out back that is the band room would be gotten rid of. That would be a new construction piece for Mills Lawn. The high school, it's basically the same kind of thing. It's just that, so that's that foundational piece for the buildings. The members of our committee that are, well, basically it was the administrative staff, had done work with our architect regarding educational adequacy, which was adding some square footage, which was actually going to bring the bill to 133,000 square feet. And that was another 25 million. So, so at this point, we're just beginning to kind of work those numbers and see where it's going to get us. Like I say, I feel like we really needed these numbers in order to start really being able to, you know, look at the meat of what we're trying to do. I think I'm going to stop there. I should say next month, TJ and Louisa are going to be working with the architect regarding numbers for a new build, and we all know that inflation has impacted greatly construction costs. So they're going to be looking at that. We'll try to be doing comparisons. We're trying to have something that'll be something like an apples to apples comparison in terms of being able to look at the two options, but we're still in process of pulling together the renovation plan. And there was definitely some concern last night that most of the educational adequacy pieces were not in the foundational piece. I don't think 25 million is where we would end up, but I know we have to think about, you know, how much money we can borrow for a renovation plan versus an OFCC build. So anyway, there's work to be done, and we'll see where we get. And then, you know, be talking to the community about how to go forward. That's all I think. Yeah.
In the renovation, are you able to increase energy efficiency other than through your HVAC system?
I mean, a piece of it is that, I mean, we're still wanting to talk to, I guess, Forest Hills. Our maintenance plan advisor had worked with them, and they had used an ESCO, or energy savings company, to help fund, you know, what will be, which for us would be substantial, you know, mechanical system replacement. What our maintenance plan advisor has pointed out is that, you know, replacing a lot of old mechanical system is going, you know, all of the replacements are going to be a lot more efficient than what we already have. But how, I mean, I think if there is some way for us to get monies to help us really, you know, increase that efficiency, that would be great, but we don't know yet. And TJ and I were going to talk to folks that were recommended by our maintenance plan advisor about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think last night the facilities committee got some really strong budgetary numbers to help us making decisions going forward, and that's where we're at in the process. As far as some levy highlights, during the November board meeting, I gave my 5-year forecast. The 5-year forecast projects a positive general fund balance through the end of the 2028-2029 school year. I know that's actually beyond our 5 years, but we use those numbers to project out 10 years. So looking at that, we would not be looking for an operating levy until 2027 or 2028. We also discussed as a board our options for our permanent improvement fund renewal that is expiring, and with the need of our facility, the board has given me the direction to go ahead and start planning for, so hopefully we'll have a decision on what the project will be. I can't say what the project will be, but we are looking at a bond combination levy for the November 2023 ballot at this time. And if you're looking for more information on the 5-year forecast, you can look at our November 10th regular school board meeting. Yeah, and there's also a document there that outlines sort of the options that the district has for running levies. And we decided that, yes, the best option was to look at a combination bond and something else to address our facility needs in the fall of 2023. Well, not yet.
Well, I'd say congratulations on the 2028 because you had a shorter runway, right? I think was it 2024 previous?
We have some, excuse me, some operating levies expiring at that time. We thought we could go a little further, so, we're cautious. And I'm going to apologize that I missed the send your documents in for this because I would have had this sheet for everyone. But I will tell you that the November board meeting in board docs, this document, levy options, really explains it. And so we were trying to think, how do we balance new money with kind of continuing a continuing levy? So we have some options. And that's how we're approaching this, because there's no way we can approach a bond issue, a facilities issue, without saying this is just new money. But how do we balance that with just continuing, and by that I mean no additional taxes, you continue to pay what you're already paying. In addition to that, we do have our bond, our current bond debt, which falls off in 2027. So there are some options there, because we're trying to be cognizant of cost, approaching a project where cost is you just can't get around it. So that's it. But again, apologies. We have so many documents in board docs, whether it's a facilities meeting or a board meeting, and if you're looking for something and can't find it, just call me. Because it's easy to access that way, and I'll guide you.
I don't think there was a call for documents. I think we took our own.
Yeah, and I will say the 5-year forecast is, those projections to remain positive is assuming a renewal of our 2 existing emergency levies. So we do have 2 ballot issues coming up. November of 2023, which is a new money, and then after that, there is the emergency levies, which is not new money. That is existing funding. That's just maintaining the funding that we have. But that will require a renewal of those funds.
It's not an emergency.
It's not an emergency. That is the name.
People bring that up. They're like, why
Yes,
is it an
that is the
emergency?
name of
You
the
plan better.
levies.
Yeah, it's just the name, the type of levy that it is that went on the
Yeah,
ballot.
and we will probably be combining those into what's called a substitute levy. That is when you combine 2 emergency levies or more together, is a substitute levy.
So I just want to mention a few things. One is, this agenda item around coordinating communications. We want to develop, and this is, I think, something that the village has the capacity to do, a web page where these higher level documents, can be available. So extracting some of the things that I think, might help, people kind of stack up, like, not all the details around the facilities committee meeting or whatever, but I think that's an opportunity for all of us to, put that in a place that is accessible to citizens. And I feel very strongly that the more transparent we all are, the more successful we will be in this community. So, I want to highlight that. The second thing is I really appreciate the updates that I just heard, because if the school board feels comfortable with that level of communication and that doesn't, violate House Bill 140 or whatever, which, I could go on my diatribe like I always do about, our state legislature, then, that is huge, I think, for council in particular, just to kind of like understand that. And I've become a fan in watching your meetings, but I'm not sure that.
lately.
Yes, they have. Yeah, I realize, like, not everybody, like, it doesn't have to just be the village council meetings that are
We
always
strive
so,
for
yeah.
boring television, but lately they've been spicier.
Yes. But that being said, I think, I'd love it if you guys could continue to be involved on that level, because just what I heard right now, like, very helpful for some of the things that we're talking about. And I also think, I would guess that we would start to transition more into collaborative opportunities and whatnot that don't seem to be involved in that. And then the third thing I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of is our energy special improvement district. And, when Steve Kahn was on the board, I confirmed with him that schools can take advantage of energy improvements and spreading that out over like a 10, I think up to even 30-year period. And so, and again,
What's the source you're talking about?
yeah, so this is basically, so we passed several years ago the ESID, Energy Special Improvement District, which any business that wants to trigger this, and residents can do this as well, can basically, and we put it across the entire village, they can basically have assessed to their property taxes any investments that they make in energy improvements. So it can be a business, it can be residences, and we confirm that school districts can also take advantage of this, and it's essentially just kind of like the village facilitates that, right? Because, again, you don't have property taxes in the same way. And I can share that information again, but it is a way to essentially finance those activities over the long haul. So, and I'm sure I'll be able to find that email, but I think it's important to know that that is something that school districts can take advantage of. But again, it's a different process, but it's one that's facilitated through the village. So.
Where is the money
You're borrowing money against future tax assessments.
Right.
So there's PACE financing, said, investors essentially buy up the debt that becomes available through this program. So you're borrowing against future tax payments you're going to make on your own property. What's the benefit for the investors? Well, there's some tax implications for them. You have access to capital.
Terry, were you gonna?
No.
Okay.
You're talking about the pace.
PACE, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So ESID is the I guess the law that we had to pass or whatever. But then, yeah, right. It is PACE financing, exactly. Okay. Any other? Yeah.
Yeah, just I want to be clear on the numbers that Judith shared. There was the 25 million and the 50 million, and I just wanted to know the relationship between those two, and does any of that cover the educational adequacy component?
The 25 million does not, and there's a whole list of things. If you go onto the website, the drawings that our architect did, that's where it
Mike,
primarily,
you need more mic.
where primarily the information is. And he's got our current floor plans, and then he's got a second gray plan. He's got red writing on that. He basically did a listening tour with the principals and the superintendent and a couple other folks, the assistant principal of the high school, and listened to, the things that aren't working so well for them, and thought about how to change that. And then he did some drawings. When you see the drawings, there's, the gray part, which is just mechanical system upgrades. Then there's the blue, which is deep renovation, and then the yellow is new construction.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, well, I will take a look.
And it talks about, I think he tries to articulate the concerns that informed what he did.
Right. All right, great. I will take
I
a
have a
look. Thank you.
question. Did any of what was included have anything to do with ADA compliance, or was there an ADA compliance piece? Was there an ADA compliance piece involved with the architectural renderings of?
Well, ADA is part of what he's thinking about.
Okay.
In the foundational, I mean, I think there are bathrooms that have ADA shortcomings.
Okay.
And they're talking about basically just redoing the bathrooms.
Okay.
The old, and not in the 2002 section,
Sure.
but in the rest of the building. The one thing that's not been sorted through, because, you know, if we do more new construction, we would be getting rid of the spaceship, which you know, is a tiered you know, tiered seats. And it's where the orchestra functions, I think, primarily. And so there's definitely an issue with that.
Sure.
There's been I mean, we're still in the middle of the process.
Right.
Carmen, any restroom that's in either phase would be, we're required to do it
Well,
to
it has
ADA.
to be, but
Correct.
specifically with the orchestra area, so things can be, I mean, things can be retrofitted to be compliant. But I just wanted to know if that was, okay.
It's been being thought about,
Sure.
definitely. I
Okay.
mean, there was the idea even of basically bringing that room to just one level,
Sure.
and then it wouldn't be an orchestra room probably,
Right.
but it could be used for something else. So that's one of the ideas that has been thrown out there.
Thank you.
Judith, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sure the inflationary effect is in the numbers. Was there
Yes.
any indication of how much the price was affected by inflation and market conditions?
I can't say.
They did build in, yeah, they built in
built it in.
what they anticipate construction cost
Yeah,
to
for the
be
future.
at the time that we would be going out to bid.
Both the architect and the engineering firm are pretty confident in their numbers and said that publicly last night, based upon a November ballot, because they said the longer you wait, you kind of see the dollar clock rolling. But they felt very confident. And if you go on to the website, you can see the columns where they say, here's where we're building in. So the numbers you see are complete numbers. It's not like what's this plus then there's a contingency and then there's a fee. They're pretty complete.
Complete if you go to the ballot in November.
Correct.
Yeah, Gavin.
So you said November 2023 is what you're thinking. So do you have a sense of what the timeline might be for making a decision about what the plan would look like? And I guess I just want to make sure that the reason I'm interested is because obviously we're thinking about our budgets and thinking about how we're approaching taxpayers, and so just trying to think about how to factor it into our considerations as well.
Yeah, so there's another document that sort of outlines the timelines that are necessary for levies for schools. And it does depend on what that levy is. There are different timelines, but action for a levy would be taken as early as a June board meeting, which means that decisions would need to be made before then. I do have to work with bond counsel and legal counsel as far as bond counsel needs to know what type of project we're doing to develop a financing scheme. And then legal counsel needs to know what type of levy we're looking at so that they can help us prepare the documents that are necessary to be passed by the board to be ready to be on the November ballot. So it is, there's certainly a, big planning period. We can't make a decision. This is one of the reasons that we wouldn't be on the May ballot this year. If we wanted to be on for May, I would have needed to know yesterday or sooner what we were doing. So there is a big lead time there, I guess I would say.
I do have one other question. I think it was you, Judith, that mentioned state funding or said something about the Facilities Commission or OFCC. So, and sorry, I hope I don't say this wrong, but in the past, was it the case that that state funds were only available for new construction? That's still, I'm seeing a lot of nods, so that's still the case? Okay, and state funding, I know there had been questions before about whether or not state funding was available. I think I read in the paper or somewhere that it seemed like state funding may still be available. Is that the case?
So we still qualify for ELP's Expedited Local Partnership Program, and we qualify at 27%. So that means that you have to pass the project in its entirety. And then roughly 8 to 10 years out, you get a credit from the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, the OFCC, to offset the project. And you have to close out your project to get your credit.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess I would just clarify, 8 to 10 years out after the passage is when you get the money. So it's not 8 to 10 years after the project, although in the past, so the OFCC has greatly improved the speed at which the time that the project is finished, that they reconcile and distribute the funds back to the school.
All right, thanks for that clarification. I think this is a good transition into, again, why I will, emphasize that the village in particular, or I'm speaking for the village, we want to coordinate as best as we can, because as we transition into this next discussion about, the fact that we've put off increasing our utility rates for the last several years, and and also looking at like a major deficit. So it's great that the township is shorted up, and that people are in different positions, but we have to finally kind of look at this. But again, we want to figure out whatever way we can coordinate so that we can, spread out the impacts. And so we've, been very intentional about thinking about that. But I think that's where I'm going to hand it off to Josue to talk about where the village is at.
Thank you, Brian. And I've included these slides in the handout that's in front of you. Some of these slides most of these slides you would have seen them at the last meeting. So all the slides up to page 3 to the reciprocal tax are the same slide. The utility rates, that's the new presentation, but I'll start off with, yes, thank you. I'll start off with the reciprocal tax. But first I want to reiterate what Brian said, that we have been working on finding every efficiency that we can in all of our services. We've delayed any utility rate increases during the entire time I've been here. I think a major part of my job has been identifying efficiencies, cost savings, and improving our economic condition, whether that's internal operations or looking at business partnerships to bring in more revenue sources. Cresco has been the direct result of some of those partnerships. So we looked at every way to improve revenues while also reducing cost. And given the economic environment we're in, they're just nearly impossible to avoid revenue increases across the board in our organization. That includes reciprocal tax and utility rate adjustments. So, okay, sorry. I'll try to speak a little louder. I'm not feeling too well. I was saying that we've looked at everything that we could do to avoid rate increases and reciprocal tax adjustments, and we're really at the point where we need to do something. And so one of the revenue opportunities that we've been presenting for some time now is adjusting the reciprocal tax credit that we provide our residents. So our residents that live in the village and work somewhere else, they're paying their taxes, at the location of where they're working. We provide 100% tax credit for taxes paid in the municipality of the work up to 1.5%. So if their location of work is less than 1.5%, then we have the possibility, the opportunity to recoup some income tax revenue from that. But the majority of folks are working in locations where income tax rate is higher than the village. Our tax rate is 1.5%. Dayton is 2.5%. Columbus is 2.5%. Xenia is 2.25%. Fairborn is 2.5%. So there really isn't a mechanism for us to recapture income tax because residents that are working outside the village are paying higher taxes, income tax outside. So I've included in the table what the impact will be on a reciprocal tax credit adjustment. The scenario 1 here is keeping the tax rate at the current 1.5% structure, and what would a 25% reduction look like? So going from 100% to 75% credit, we would generate 120,000. If we reduced it to 50%, it would generate 240,000. Reducing it to 25%, it would generate 361,000, and eliminating the reciprocal tax credit would generate 481,000. So those are the scenarios. I think if council would make a credit adjustment, I think it would phase in some credit adjustment. It wouldn't go to zero right away, or I don't know that it would go to zero at any point. Any questions on the reciprocal tax credit adjustment?
So this idea was presented a decade ago, I think, by Henry Myers, and I want to acknowledge that because when he did so, it fell on deaf ears for a number of years. He kept hammering that. There were things in the Yellow Springs News, I think, from Henry Myers, and finally, people finally were going, well, maybe that's not a bad idea. So I just want to acknowledge Henry.
Well, and I think, you know, to that point, Henry also emphasized how can we figure out how a lot of the folks that live in this village can also contribute that, you know, don't have income tax, you know, obligations and whatnot. So I think we've thought about that as well. I will say, you know, there have been some scenarios that Josue has shared with us about increasing our income tax percentage, which we are not looking at right now. So just so there's clarity around that, we're focused on potentially changing the reciprocal tax, but not increasing our income tax percentage at this point. So,
thank you, Brian. And Marianne, good point on that. Henry Meyer brought it up. One of the things that we've seen throughout Ohio is that it's becoming less and less common for municipalities to offer 100% tax credit. So we're among the less than 50% group. So more and more communities are adjusting their reciprocal tax credits. On enterprises, in November we had a presentation by our enterprise consultants. We have a group of consulting firm, Courtney and Associates, that advise us on municipal enterprise business activities. So electric, water, sewer, they look at our rates, they look at our cost structure, and provide us with advice on how to have better performing municipal enterprises. So last year we hired them to do a complete rate study across all of our enterprises, so water, sewer, and electric. And they conducted their study, provided a presentation to council, and in that presentation, they presented what our current revenue requirements are, what we're bringing in, and what's the difference. What's the difference in revenue we need to raise to meet operating obligations. This is just to maintain what we have going on. So the increases that were proposed were varied from 6% for electric, 24% for sewer, and up to 41% for water. I see TJ's face. Yes, those are high rates, and we couldn't do all those rates at once. So what I'm recommending to council, and the recommendation is supported by Cordy and Associates, is phasing in these utility rates adjustments. So those are on page 5. The top slide there has those recommendations on a percentage basis. The bottom slide has those recommendations on a dollar basis. So we won't raise all the revenue required for all the enterprises in year 1, but we will eventually, over a 5-year period, raise the revenues needed to maintain our operations.
All right, yeah. Way to
So-
bring down the energy, huh? Yeah.
I'm sorry. It is a bitter reality, and it's very shocking.
I mean, we have great water. We have great electricity, and, I mean, we have great services. And so I think we tend to discount how much, I mean, we expect to pay less than actually I think the services are worth. So, yeah, it's not fun, but we don't have a choice.
I have a question, not really about this. I mean, I don't know what I can say about utility rates, but is there any discussion, and I know it's not tonight's agenda, but is there any discussion about making some changes, whether it's changes to policies that are preventing this, and I ask because I don't know, but business development and housing development, because it seems like if we do that, that then mitigates some of this, speaking as resident first and superintendent second. So just a question, really a rhetorical question. I don't necessarily need an answer, but.
Yeah, and I think that's totally on the agenda, because, you know, I think we're thinking about the same thing as what mitigating factors are out there. And so I can say one of the things that we are going to be very intentional about is housing development in a way that benefits the schools. And, you know, we've talked about this. I mean, that benefits us all, but I mean, I think that, you know, again.
Benefits us all.
Yes. But I think, you know, but again, like, makes sense for all the taxing bodies. And so, because I know, you know, some of the focuses in the past around housing development have, you know, maybe not benefited everybody. Business development, you know, there are a lot of upsides, and so we're always conservative about our budgeting, but Cresco continues to grow. You know, we collaborated with Cresco, in fact, to basically put out there that we are open for business, and we've had a lot of meetings, you know, to talk about that. And again, I think that's where, you know, Marilyn hasn't mentioned it yet, but I think there's also like potential for the township to be thinking about, like, you know, as we did in 2010, like how we encourage that business development in a way that helps sustain our village. I also made a note about the basic income initiative that the Community Foundation has brought forward. And, you know, it really came together for me when Gavin mentioned that this could potentially be a mitigating factor to make sure that we're not pricing out people when some of these changes happen, and so, you know, that they can't stay in the village. And I guess the other thing that that we have learned from Rita, who does our income tax, is that there is the potential to do some level of tax credit on a threshold income that, you know, could achieve a goal around more progressive taxation. So, I mean, that's, you know, kind of I guess a sampling of things that are certainly on our minds. Not to mention, you know, I'm going to continue to push for paid parking, because, I mean, every other destination town in the world does it, and I have been annoyed that it continues to be resisted. But I've talked about this every year since I've been on council. again, there's some of these other things around like making sure that people that should be paying taxes are doing that, whether it's like outside contractors or, certain vendors that are here like 8 months of the year. And again, those are like smaller things. But I guess these are things that we continue to talk about and I want to see action on. And so I think that will help to some degree, probably not with the utility thing, but, but it will balance some of these other aspects. So, and I guess this is where we want to continue to have discussions and any kind of ideas about, what else we can do that could make a difference. And then I think the other thing that I mentioned at the beginning and Mary Ann reiterated is there also has to be a reality check about, we have this great community with all kinds of amazing services, from excellent schools to, again, like making sure your lights are going to stay on, to making sure that, if you have an incident, you're going to be gotten to whatever, hospital that you need to be. And I feel like that's something that, as long as we're talking and recognizing that our community members understand that as well. So anyway, so I think that's kind of the bigger picture about, why we need to stay in communication.
And I'll just add this, it's not a necessarily a policy thing regarding business development, but certainly there are efforts afoot, if you will, for various parts of the community to be looking at ways that we could benefit from the Intel plant that's going to be on the other side of Columbus. Those large industries like that tend to have cottage industries that support them. I can imagine there'll probably be a lot of remote workers, potentially, or some, and if they could work and get paid by Intel and live in a great place like Yellow Springs, it'd be a great win, I think, for everybody. So the entire region, Dayton, eastward, is looking into that, and we, anyone that's listening, we ought to be doing any and everything we can to try to be creative, and, be inventive, and just look at how we can take advantage of what will probably be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, in the state of Ohio. All right?
Okay. Other questions?
Terry, if I can, we've been working on housing and economic development, and that is going to grow. We need growth, and I think that's something that, as the three taxing entities, we need to recognize that there's a basic math problem that we have. Our cost of delivery is going up. Our tax base, whether it's property or people, it's limited. It isn't that wage or the property values aren't increasing to the level that we need them to support the cost of delivering services, whether it's the schools, the fire department, or the village. And so I think we need to have those conversations about growth, and we need to have them with our citizens, because there are times where I feel that there is a large constituency that is against any type of growth, and there's some level of growth that we need both from housing and business development in order to support all of our services.
Well, and I think that's a good point to emphasize with utilities. While electric, is fairly fixed, it was made clear to us that, sewer and water could benefit significantly from more users. And so, I think that was an important takeaway from Courtney. So, okay. Anything else? All right. Well, yes. So I did want to make sure, as I emphasized at the beginning, we want to hear any questions or feedback from citizens, which we didn't have time for last time, and then I think some of these other issues, that are on the agenda, there are some high points to mention, but I don't think they're really the focus for tonight. So, Jessica, I saw your hand. Are these mics live? Okay.
Do you want to somebody hand her one?
Yeah, Chris Moocher showed that, yeah, you can carry that mic anywhere, man.
Hi, Jessica Thomas, Yellow Springs News. So just for people who might be out there watching, Josue, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what reciprocal tax means for somebody who is actually working outside of the community. So when you say that we would increase the percentage of that 1.5%, what does that mean for someone who is looking at that tax when they look at their paycheck breakdown? Does that mean that it's not going to change? Does that mean it effectively goes up from their paycheck? What does that mean?
If they're working outside of town, depending on how the tax rate is adjusted, that would determine the overall impact. But what essentially means is that they would pay the village income tax that they're currently not paying. So if the rate is to be adjusted, let's just say hypothetically we're at 1.5 and it gets reduced to 50%. That means that they're paying 0.75% of additional income tax overall, and that increase in income tax is going to be remitted to the village, either through the employer, through employer withholdings, or at the end of the year when they do their filings. So, and what that financial impact is on a 0.75 will be dependent on how much they earn.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, honestly, we haven't really discussed it, but, as Josue emphasized, I don't see us going to a no reciprocal kind of scenario. So my sense is that, something in that 50% realm is something that we'll look at more closely. It's also why we mentioned at Monday's council meeting that if you are now working from home instead of working in Columbus, you should check in, because you shouldn't be paying 2.5% income tax. You should be paying 1.5% because you're working from home in the village, for example.
Even if the person you work for is headquartered in Columbus?
Yes.
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 I could work for an employer in Columbus and not pay Columbus.
Yeah, if you're not going
taxes
into the
because I'm
office
not
in
in
Columbus.
office. Wow.
Yes, and so that's why, and, we also learned that it's a 3-year statute of limitations on getting any credit for the past 2 years when people were working from home. So, a good friend of mine who was, during those 2 years of the pandemic, working from home and not going to OSU, the tax rate should be 1.5%, and she can claim a credit for that, additional 1% that she was paying. So.
Will the village get the 1.5? I mean, if she
Yes.
paid it and it went to Columbus, then they have to pay it back to the village?
So Columbus is 2.5.
Yeah.
They've been paying 2.5, and they
Right.
could get that.
And one thing that Rita shared with us, we had a meeting with the executive director, is that in the past, during the pandemic, they were just kind of ignoring the realities of where people were working from, but now they're actually recognizing that. And so, and then, Josue, you shared, I mean, they've got 6,000 plus requests for these refunds. So, but again, the information needs to get out there.
So,
Yeah, I would just say there's differences in types of income tax. So city and village income tax is based on where you work. So if you work there, you pay taxes there.
However, the Columbus.
The actual location, right. So if you're working remotely, you are not working in Columbus, you are
but
working.
the company you're working for is being supported by the taxpayers of Columbus. I mean, the company is, okay.
Yeah. But school income tax, for instance, is based on where you live.
Yeah.
So it is different. So for example, I work here. I pay income tax to the village of Yellow Springs. I don't live here, but I pay income tax because I work here. I do not pay school income tax here because I do not live here. So that's sort of, it's always based on, for city and village, it is where the work is done. So it's not where the company's located, because, I mean, a lot of people work for giant corporations that are headquartered all over the world, but where you work is where you pay your income tax for villages and cities, and then school income tax is where you live.
Likewise, if we attract businesses to town that have workers who can work remotely other places, we wouldn't get that income tax.
But, and isn't it true, Jake, also that income tax for the schools is, I mean, basically income tax for the village is payroll tax? But not the income tax for schools, I thought included investment income. Taxation on investment.
There's a lot of variables, yes. So I'm not gonna.
Depends upon the type of income tax that is passed whenever that issue is passed. So if it's a traditional income tax, or if it's non-traditional, so there's not one blanket answer.
So I wanted to say, essentially, Yellow Springs could be called a bedroom community. I think about 30% of the people who live here actually work here. And so for the village, our primary tax is income tax. But if someone doesn't, if they live here and they work somewhere else, they essentially, generally, would not pay any income tax to the village. And yet, they're enjoying all of the services of the village, whether it's the streets, the parks, the library, the ambulance services, and yet they're not paying in. And then another group that's not paying in, which is sort of referenced, are people who are retired and have investments. Those investments are not taxed by the village. So we have, and then if you count the amount of property that's taken up by Antioch College and the schools and maybe some churches, you have a huge amount of property in this village that doesn't pay property tax either. So we have some difficulties.
And we did get confirmation because we looked into, could we tax capital gains? Yeah, that opportunity like left 20 years ago. So there are like 5 communities in Ohio that did what they should have done back then, and you know. But I really appreciate that clarification around how the schools funding works, because it again highlights why I agree with Josue that growth is important. And so if we have more residents, more people living here, they will contribute more to our schools. And so I think, both of these aspects make sense in terms of how we sustain our community.
Just want to add something really quickly. Growth that's smart growth. Growth of retirees.
Yes.
Growth families. We need people who have school-age children in the village. The average villager is 50.
Well, 65.
Average, the average.
Is, yeah, I mean, more than 50% are 65 or
Right.
more.
Yeah. So, innovative, progressive, intelligent growth, not just growth for growth's sake.
Yeah, thanks for emphasizing that. I agree. Okay. Any other citizen concerns, questions? Yeah, Cheryl. Hand over that mic.
Toss it to her. No, don't.
I think I just wanted to just make a brief comment just for kind of historical context for those of us who grew up in a time when there were more people, and just to kind of say that this village actually can hold more people. I think at the time that I was here, it was around 4,200. So I had a question about, do you have an idea of how many people you want to be here, families, people like that? There was a study, I'm thinking of our newspaper archives, and around the mid-'80s, there was a consultant hired to attract more families, and the population was 4,200. and I think they were looking at like maybe 200 or 300 more folks. So I'm just throwing that out there because as you do your assessments, having an understanding that what the tax rates, utility rates, and things like that would be if we had 100 more people, if we had 300 more people, would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Also, for joint meetings, and this is something to think about down the line, it might be helpful if everybody just collaborated and put all of their levy issues, tax issues, all of that on one sheet so that the community can see everything on one spreadsheet. And then that helps people understand their budgets and what they have to look at in terms of cost increases coming down the line. What happens is it's too piecemealed. So you have Township has something, school board has something, village has 12 different things they're looking at right now, you know, exaggerating, but having it all on one sheet so that families can do an honest assessment of their budget plans to prepare for all of these increases, I think is critical. And that's all I have to say.
Speaking as a private citizen, I want to echo everything Cheryl said, but also an inclusion of options, particularly like the reciprocal tax options, is important because you're not asking voters their permission to do this. This is something that council just decides to do, whereas the schools and the township do not have the same affordances. So making sure that people know that this is the tax you're paying now, these are our options, and this is what we're choosing, but we might have to do this down the line. So making sure that it's clear to folks at home that, yeah, your reciprocal tax did go up a little bit, but that's not the most it could go up. And if you vote to raise taxes, we might still have to raise that reciprocal tax to meet our needs.
So I just want to say I really appreciate that feedback. And Cheryl, I don't know, was it just the last newspaper that mentioned that 4,200 and 4,400 population? There was something in one of the last two. News from the past. Yes, right. So I remembered like reading that. And for folks that were here at that time, you may also remember there was this panic that we were going to become a city if we went over 5,000. Before Patty Bates left, she wrote a detailed memo about the fact that like effectively crossing over to city status does not change anything. So, I mean, so that, again, I wasn't around when that, alarmist, thing went up, but whatever. But I do love the idea of like actually looking at what growth means and, particularly in terms of utilities. I think that's an analysis we can do. Second thing I want to say is, to me, this is the first time we are formally talking about the reciprocal tax. So there still needs to be, council meetings about this, but, I've said it a couple times. I've been the bottleneck about like not bringing this to an official discussion for 2 years. Similar to, I think, I kind of felt that way about utility rates. So this is really like we wanted to talk jointly about it before, we start to go through like a public process with it. So again, we expect there to be more discussion. So anyway, I think very important feedback. And I love also, Carmen, what you said about like it's got to be done smartly and intentionally if we're going to really make the changes we want. So, okay. Any other citizen concerns pieces? Okay, so I guess what I would like to suggest from here is there are potentially, I kind of threw out there 3 standing agenda items that if we decide to continue to meet, maybe things that we come back to. And then, I guess I also want to emphasize, I like this idea of like creating a 1-pager that could be easily referenced to kind of cover our like updates and that sort of thing, which I think is kind of related to the last topic. Probably the hardest one is how do we balance affordability and quality of life? And so again, this comes back to we have a great community. People live here because they want all the services that we offer. So I think that's going to be, would potentially be an ongoing one. But I guess I just wanted to highlight, and then if we want to, dip into any of these with our remaining time, that I do think there are some great opportunities around coordinating our communications. So I already mentioned earlier that we could take on having that web page that could be the clearinghouse for the higher level documents that people could find. And certainly, everybody could, share those, but I think the village has the capacity to set that up and, and share things like what Marilyn brought today, what Josue brought today, what Terry mentioned, that, I think people would be interested in. So I think that's one thing. We don't necessarily need to dig into that tonight, but I also think that, the village, we have somebody that, focuses on social media, that can do a graphic in like 10 minutes or whatever. And so I think I can say that we can support those kinds of things, just like we've been happy to support like meetings on YouTube and all the other things to do that. So I want to keep those opportunities out there. We've got this sort of collaboration shared services piece. And again, we don't need to dig into this tonight, but I really appreciated that Chief Burge put together, and this was shared with everyone, some details around what it really looks like to combine a fire, EMS, police department. And we talked about that a little bit in our public safety work session. And Colin, thank you for being there. And when I looked at those documents, I thought it was, kind of reflected what you said as well, is that it's got some long-term benefits, but it's got a lot of challenges. But again, like, I think we should continue to talk about things like, how the township and the village is working on the Yellow Springs Clifton connector, and how the schools in the village and the township are working on broadband. And, there are a variety of other things that, I think we should continue to look at and talk about. Again, that doesn't mean that we need to have a meeting like every 2 months, but I think a couple times a year or quarterly, and I guess I'm setting up next steps, to me makes sense. But again, I want to make sure we're bought into that, and, and that we all think that that can be productive. Yes, so.
I want to echo what Brian has said about Chief Burge looking into a potential joint township and police merger. Clearly, as you've said, it would be a long haul thing, and there are pluses and minuses. But regardless, I think just starting to think about things like that helps us think, oh, wow, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. So it's sort of like thinking outside the box, and I really appreciate that. I want to come back to the housing and economic development, because affordable housing has been talked about for 3 decades in Yellow Springs, more than 3 decades. And economic development has as well. And we can sit here and we can talk about it. And next year we can sit here and we can talk about it, and on and on and on. And that's more or less what's happened. So the fact that we have these 3 entities together, I think if there's a way we can make a commitment as 3 entities in whatever form that would take for those 2 initiatives, would have to happen.
I was going to say, in terms of that idea of a potential joint police fire safety, like a safety program. I know Oakwood does that, and I would hope maybe you could bring them here to talk about how it's worked for them, because, you know, you can learn something from the folks who are already doing it, for sure. I wanted to bring up tonight something I've mentioned at the school board, because and I just want to bring it up to see what the interest might be. There's a group in the state called Honesty in Ohio Schools, and they did a Zoom meeting on safety in schools. And they had information there, and I had a little something that I'd put in, but it wasn't the right thing, actually, I'm sorry. But they basically have materials to do a program on securing gun storage. And they felt that this was very important, because unsecure weapons can be accessed by children accidentally, by suicide, and obviously, you know, with some of the things going on in schools, unstable people are having access to weapons. So it struck me as something that we might want to do together, you know, in terms of the township, folks out there in the country have more guns, and the village with the police department and them playing a role, and then the schools, and a lot of it is, it's just basically an education campaign to make sure people are thinking about, if they've got weapons, that they are secured and not accessible for, you know, intentional or unintentional injuries. I think it would be worthwhile thing. They've got materials written, you can use them. Some schools have actually, you know, they've been a part of they've been doing the education through their own networks as a way to increase safety of children, basically. So I don't know whether there's any interest. I was going to bring it back to the school board if there was. Maybe talk about that we could participate in something like that. So people maybe need to think about it, but anyway.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing those documents. I would say, I personally am interested in, if other council members were interested, I'd want, you know, Chief Burge to look at it and you know, kind of weigh in. So that's where I'm at. I don't know how other council members feel. So.
Yeah, I thought, didn't what we received recently from Chief Burge look at?
Not this.
Okay.
Yeah, this is different. I don't know that Paige has seen it yet.
Okay.
So.
No problem.
All right, well, I heard at least 3 nods, so.
I'll comment on it. Our police department is safety centered, so anything that we could do to improve the safety of our residents and our visitors, we'll do that. We have Doug Anders that goes out to the senior center and other groups to talk about preventing scams and frauds and numerous other things. This certainly will be one of the educational activities that we like to do. And I don't know if there's anything specific other than just reducing access to guns. You know, some of the things that are happening in the community are centralized storage for the hunting equipment, whether that's a rifle or a shotgun, things that people might not necessarily, or keeping in their home for personal safety, but for recreational activity. Gun access for those that are keeping weapons at home for safety. That's a different group that, TJ, you know maybe a little bit more about this, but there are different dynamics there than working with those residents. And I think a lot of it, I think if there's one thing that we could do is have advocacy around improving safety trainings for gun owners in the state. The state just signed legislation, or we have legislation that folks aren't required to get a permit to carry their weapons, right? They're just can own guns without any training. So there's some challenges there, and we're happy to explore any educational campaign to improve safety in our community.
Okay. Well, I think that's enough to suggest that we should revisit it and look at it. And so I guess, yeah, I'm glad people are jumping in. Any other topics related to these kind of last items that people want to bring up, or other comments before we talk about next steps? Okay, well, I would say, and not going to necessarily, make anyone commit, right now, but I think we should continue to meet jointly. And I guess actually, in relation to that, one of the things that I would like to do, but I don't know if all the bodies feel this way, is to have a kind of planning subcommittee for any next meetings, because I do want to make sure that, and actually kind of reminds me of what Cheryl said about like, how do we like look at this like on one sheet or whatever, maybe it's front and back. But as I thought about like having a second meeting, in my mind, I had thought that it would be good to have the finance people and one elected official, kind of plan like what are we going to really look at for that agenda. I don't want to be the person that's, deciding the agenda like for every meeting or whatever, so I'd want it to be collaborative. And so, I guess I'll put that out there again. If there are any thoughts about whether that's doable, I mean, I'm going to say I think Josue would be willing, or, our finance director, to be part of that, kind of subcommittee for planning meetings to make sure that it's worth our time to be here and that it's productive. So I don't know how others feel, but, again, I want to make sure that I'm happy with ending early because I'm a big Survivor fan, so that starts at 8. But anyway, I'm joking. I can watch it like later. But I will say I don't want to like, again, like I just want to make sure that we're intentional about like why we're coming together. And I think that that kind of subcommittee could make sure that we're, looking at issues in a way that makes sense to all of us and that we're comfortable with. So I don't know, Terry, was that a nod from you?
No, that was not a nod.
Okay.
I can't speak for the board.
Okay.
I think it's probably something we would need to talk about.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about it. I mean, we're entering our strategic planning cycle. We have facilities. We've got so much going on.
Mike.
And, this is the third night in a row that we're leaning on meetings for Terry and Jay, and the frequency in us, yeah, too. I mean, I worry about more than them than us. But it's just one of those things where I think the frequency would be important, and we do have liaisons, with the village, and so maybe there's a way to lighten the load here too. But I think
well, and again,
the board needs to talk about it and figure out what our posture is going forward. But yeah.
I think that makes sense. And again, like, I'm not talking about a meeting in the next couple months.
Right.
We need to all like move on. But again, what I'm talking about is less about frequency and more about just efficiency and like focus meetings. And that's why, like, yes, we have liaisons, but I think it would be better if a finance person from each body was in the mix as well to plan those meetings. So, and then just make sure we're, talking about things like that we're comfortable with and that are going to be productive. So.
Sure.
All right, so it sounds like
Not
Chris
our
is
finance
like,
person.
yeah.
So, yeah, I'll just throw out, and obviously the council hasn't like made a decision, so I'm just speaking for myself here. But I wonder about sort of pretty infrequent meetings of this group, but maybe we mix in some form of like more public dialogue. I understand this is technically a public meeting that people could come to, but like amongst other things, like where would people sit comfortably? Like I feel like I think we got to do a better job saying, hey, here's what's going on. As I think I might be the newest, public official here. I feel like everybody here is really earnestly trying to figure out how to provide great services at the lowest possible costs. I mean, really trying hard. And there's nobody who's like trying to screw anybody over. Like, we're trying to figure this out. And I feel like we just got to figure out how to talk to more people about these dynamics And as much as it's nice to talk to all of you, honestly, there's a fairly small subset of us that end up talking a lot. And I think I would like, if for this group, I wonder if part of our effort could be to spend a little less time talking to each other and think about how might we consciously figure out how do we talk to everybody else.
I feel like at the moment we should just rely on the liaisons. I mean, we can talk to our finance chief, I can talk to Jay, I can talk to Terry. You know, there's a lot going on with the school district right now, and I definitely don't, I mean, I think we should think about having meetings when there's something we need to talk about and not, and this was a good time to, you know, hear from the township regarding the levy and, you know, all of that. And I think it was a great opportunity for us to talk about the facility situation. And you guys are talking about reciprocal tax. I know you were, Brian, trying to hold that back till you had a chance to talk to the others of us, because you want to try to set that as a way of that we should be doing things, and I think it is a way we should try to do things. But if there's nothing specific to talk about, I mean, I wouldn't think more than quarterly, but I also think we should kind of look at, is there anything here that we really can talk about here right now? Is there something it will make it a useful meeting?
Yeah.
But I don't want to rely on the staff to have to go to more meetings to plan a meeting, for example. I think we can do that with consultation.
Yeah, and I'm
I mean, what do you think?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in if you weren't done. Yeah, and I think at this juncture, I'm less concerned about when we meet again, but more about work product. I think the one-pager that Cheryl alluded to, you all know who needs to get together to put that together. So that is the next thing that needs to happen, is those of you who have those answers to get it all together, distribute it, whether that indicates the next meeting. And Judith, to your point, yeah, the things that we're doing organically have sort of dictated, you know, that today was a good day for us to meet. But I think, again, instead of focusing on the next time we gather, focus on homework, you know, that work product, of getting that information all in one digestible piece, because it's less, to Gavin's point, it's less for the folks in this room and more for the folks outside of this room.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't often echo sentiments, but when I do, they're Gavin's. Absolutely, we need to find a way that we can involve more of our community members. I get stopped at the dog park quite frequently because I'm out all the time. You know, so there's a lot of feedback that I get that way. And the other piece of that is what are actionable items? So everyone here, you're all exceptional, and also, what are some actionable items? What can we need to think about what we can do strategically to make movement. You know, meetings are fine, but we need to probably get some feedback from the public about what things that we can work on that are actually action.
Okay, yeah, I think what I'm hearing is we're all basically on the same page. Like, you know, again, I'm not advocating that we like have to have a meeting like every whatever, you know, like, and I do agree. I think we had some important things to talk about tonight. And then the other thing I just want to emphasize again is I want to make sure when we do meet again that it's, you know, continues to be well planned and that we have productive conversations. So, so I think we've talked about ways that can happen.
If we do try to incorporate what Gavin and the Echo Carmen had, is I think we could advertise more and maybe call it town hall or something and have it in I don't know if it would be at Mills Lawn, someplace where people can sit around and there can be community members. I mean, it could even be sort of a fishbowl kind of, it could be a fishbowl kind of thing where citizens, have you ever done that, where say you have the people who are talking in the middle and people around observing, and then if someone is an observer, they can come in and sit in the middle. Someone, you know, we could have citizens come in and sit and talk. And the topics might be a little different than how we're doing it now, but but the purpose might be engaging citizenry and getting feedback, mutual education and feedback.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Gavin, did you want to say something else?
Well, and just this thing about like meeting if we have to meet, the idea of like if there's a change coming. So I mean, I guess I just want to keep reinforcing the idea that like if we're making changes, if there's notable stuff that's coming down the pike, that's being communicated, that's something that we're all trying to do. I mean, it seems like that's a baseline, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll also just say, I did not expect much citizen participation in this meeting because in the first meeting, we didn't have time for citizen feedback. So, anyway, I think that part of it is, also how we advertise it and how we, progress. So, sweet. All right. Well, getting the sense that people are anxious. So must be other Survivor fans, right? So anyway, so I know that council needs a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And otherwise, thanks everyone. Make sure to wish Mayor Pam a happy birthday and happy holidays. All right.